Welcome to the latest edition of the Run to Daylight Show. I'm Todd Burrows at Best Ball NFL. Yes, you got that right. At Best Ball NFL on Twitter at Todd from PA. I am excited to talk about the thread that went on today about exposure, risk versus non-risk. I'm going to go tweet by tweet and give my thoughts, and I am going to be exceedingly fair. If you were part of that conversation and you want to jump into the comments, I will be taking them. I will put your thoughts up, something like this, so that we can see what your thoughts are as we go along. I think this is a very important conversation. First, though, I do want to mention our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. We are talking about the Best Ball Mania 3 draft today. $10 million prize pool, $2 million up top. And one thing I want to talk a little bit about is early drafting versus late drafting in this thing. I've done 12 already, and I think the common wisdom is that it's better to draft late rather than early, and I agree with that. But the second best time to draft is now, before ADP kind of locks in. And when you look at the board right now, in fact, my next show will be on how running back strategy right now. I think the board is perfect right now, whether you want to do zero running back, robust running back, anchor running back. I think there is a lot of value and a lot of opportunity right now. And don't forget that the winner last year drafted his team early. So spread out your, and this ties into what we're going to talk a little bit about with exposure, spread out your exposure throughout the tournament as well, because you don't know, right? Say you put all 150 bullets late and, I don't know, one running back goes down and somebody, we saw this last year, and then Henderson was a value. Now, Henderson didn't turn out to be what everyone had hoped, but this is the time of year. I remember a couple years ago with Tyreek Hill, some people didn't want to draft late at all because Tyreek Hill was more of a value now than later. So Underdog Fantasy, drafting now, catch me in the rooms. I do about one a night. I typically do them around this time. I want to get through probably about 40 or 50 by the end of May, and then I will slow down. June and July, I probably will do about 15 each up until when training camps start. Then I will speed up because people overreact to early training camp news. So thank you to our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Go to Underdog Fantasy, and if you've never played before, use the code BESTBALL to save, not to save, but they will do a match on your first $100. So you put $100 in, you get $100. You've got $200 to play, and then come see me. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put up Twitter, and I'm going to go through this thread, and I'm going to give my thoughts, and I will keep coming back and looking for the comments if you guys want to, before I move on kind of to the next subject. So this all started with Liam Murphy, who I guess was the guy. Yep, he was the one who won last year. Here is that very, very normal looking dude. I'm sure he's a very nice guy. He looks like a great guy. I mean, come on. Anyway, he won and I didn't. So I'm going to read his tweet and I'm going to give my thoughts on it. Then we're going to move on. Regarding best ball and being heavily exposed to one player, a lot of people view this as a risky strategy. I'd argue it's quite the opposite. It takes quite an ego to think you can smooth out your exposures, take down first in a milli maker. On the other hand, it's easier to build the argument that you can build the best lineup with X player if you are heavily exposed to them across 100 or 50 so lineups. An EG last year was my 60% of Gabe Davis. If he was a needed piece, which he was in the quarters, I have a good chance of having one of the best teams. All right. So, like a lot of things in life, truth and falsehood are very, very closely aligned. So he says some true things there. The part I strongly disagree with is it takes quite an ego to think you can smooth out your exposure and take out first in a milli maker. Guys like this who have a bit of an ego, and especially ones who've had success, he's missing a lot there. And I saw that a lot throughout this whole thread. Well, scared money. Scared money was another term that came up. We have now had about 8 years worth of DFS, I guess, maybe 10. And there are risky players who are very successful. I did a series of podcasts for 1 week season last year. Chipotle addict and his brother, they're heavy every week. Every week you're going to see them 50, 60, 70% on guys. You also see really good expert players who don't get above 30% on an average week on anybody. So you can win either way. Spreading your exposures is not scared. It is, in the terms of my friend Blender from Roto Grinders, who helped me a lot with things, one of the key things that you want to keep in mind is that it's not about just exposure, but what are you doing with those lineups, right? My goal is to make 150 really good lineups, each one that should have a chance to take down a GPP. Okay. So whether I maxed out my exposures at 23% or I max out my exposures at 60%, you can have, if you just listen to that tweet by him, you could, there are going to be a lot of people who say, oh yeah, that's the way to go. And they're going to make 150 shitty lineups filled with 60% owned guys. Couple of them are going to get hurt and they're going to lose their $3,750 because this is a very top heavy tournament, just like a DFS tournament. All right. So a lot of DFS theory does count. So the thought that you can't be aggressive just because you narrow your exposures is in my mind completely false. All right. So let's start there. The thing that I do agree with is that if you need a player and, let's say Gabe Davis, yes, it did give him more chances to get to the semifinals. However, if Gabe Davis had gotten hurt, he would have had much less of a chance. So again, my theory on exposure is very simple. And the biggest point is the chance of whoever it is that you like being better than other people in that tier, right? Like Gabe Davis was a very good play, right? Even though I saw some people say, well, Gabe Davis didn't do anything till the end. But that didn't make him any less of a good play. It just didn't work out till later. Sometimes teams don't do what's best for their own team. And playing Gabe Davis, I think Gabe Davis was a great play late. I didn't have a ton of them, but I saw the value in it. Okay. So I will say that, and then let's take a break, look over. Hey, Henry, how are you? All right. So I'm going to go back to this thread. And now we're going to look at James Brimacombe's point. Best ball is 95% luck and 5% skill in these top-heavy playoff structured tournaments. I disagree with that completely. All right. I don't know what Liam's lineups look like. I didn't even look at the winning lineup, which I absolutely should have. But the point is that it's about, there's so much skill that goes into best ball. And I know Justin Herzig agrees with me. there is so much skill that goes into making good lineups, stacking, who you draft, when you draft, correlations, different strategies, zero running back, anchor running back. There is a ton of skill that goes into this. Now, I think the last week, week 17, what you want to do is you want to put yourself in the best position so that luck can be your friend. All right. So when I do my podcast, when I do my drafting, I just disagree with James there. I think that best ball is no more luck than DFS or any other fantasy football. You just don't, So again, I back to the other key point on injury. I just believe that, and I have shown, and you can look at some earlier podcasts where I went over my exposures. I had 23% Deebo Samuel last year. 60% of my Deebo Samuel lineups advanced. Now, I believe a big part of that was because I build really good lineups, right? I don't think you could just have 23% of Deebo Samuel and get 60% if you're not skilled at making teams and making lineups. But I feel that I can make lineups that are as good as anybody's out there. And it was not just Deebo. Early on, first, second, third round, it's very hard to have a better win rate than whoever it is you're drafting gets. So Deebo had, less than a 30% win rate, but yet I won 63% of my Deebo contests. And there were other guys like that. This wasn't just Deebo. Anybody I drafted that really kicked ass from round 4 on, my winning percentage was way more than the winning percentage of others. So I feel I can get a lot of wins without taking the chance that Deebo got hurt, right? You could argue and say, well, Todd, if you took 80% Deebo, or 50% Deebo, you would have been even that much better. And I say, well, what if Deebo got hurt? What if Deebo got hurt and I didn't get anything? So those are some major thoughts that I have about why I do it the way I do. Now, I also think that there is more than one way to skin a cat, right? If you're okay with, and I want to find this tweet from Roe. Let's go through this. Let me try and find this. Row, row, row your boat gently down the sea. All right, so I'm completely okay with losing my $37.50 and attempt to win $2 million. As Liam said earlier, scared money don't make money. That's been my motto for 25 years. Great. All right. Well, I've played fantasy football for 20 years, and I've won almost every year some money. Last year, I got to the finals of the FFPC. I didn't win, but I was profitable in that tournament, and I had a 1 in 12 shot at 100 grand. I'll take that every year. Now, but if you're Roe, this guy, we got to show a picture of him too. If you're this guy and you're that good looking, and I'm not mocking you, but he's obviously well dressed. This guy might make $300,000 a year, and $37.50 is nothing to him. If that's the case, well, yeah, all right. If that's the way you want to play, there is an element of it's up to you and your risk tolerance. But this mocking attitude that it's scared money if you don't go all in has been disproven by DFS players like Drew Dinkmeyer, right? Guy has won the big prizes, and Guy has been profitable pretty much every year because he has good play selection and good exposures, and he builds great lineups, right? So what I think heavy exposure is it's a blunt instrument, right? It can work, but for every guy that gets the fates, I won't call it luck because I don't think Liam was lucky. I think he built a good team that won. He deserves credit for that. But for every Liam who played that way, I guarantee you there were hundreds. There's 471,000 people in the tournament this year. If you play like that, I hope everyone plays like that. I hope there's wild exposures because the more good players who, have 50, 60% of their lineups knocked out because they had some dude in the fourth round with 50% and he got hurt in the preseason, that's good for me, right? I also heard the comment, so what is my exposure? What am I willing to do? Well, in general, for the FFPC, it's like 23 and 15, 23% and this isn't like I don't artificially do it, but I've got a theory that I use and I have a variety of tiebreakers so that when I'm within a tier, I look at stacking, I look at bye weeks, I look at correlations, I look at the rest of my team. There's a lot of things I use to break those ties, and that splits up exposure. And maybe I'm just the type of guy who doesn't like people as others, but for my personal way of playing, it's not that I'm scared. It's just that this way is my way of maximizing my chance to win. And if you feel that going all out is your way, more power to you. All right, so let's go back. But he's completely okay with losing his 37.50. I'm not, right? If I lost 37.50, yes, I do have the money where I could reload next year. But there's a lot of people out there who don't, and I don't want to. But again, I feel like making good lineups is what we should be talking about. Throwing heavy exposure is a blunt instrument, right? I guarantee you're making a lot of less than ideal lineups. They're not stacked as well. They're not correlated as well if you've got heavy ownership. And unlike DFS, where pretty much everyone goes into the week healthy or we don't play them, an injury can happen at any time. If you have studied win rates like I have, especially in the first and second round, I mean, the average advance rate is 17%. I mean, there were people last year. Calvin Ridley had a 4% advance rate. I mean, your chances of advancing with him, and that was, he might have been a great play, but we'll never know because he, decided to walk away. So that's my thought on that one. Another one that I really wanted to talk about was this one from Felix Castro. But first, let me check. Very good question. Quant Pecan, why can't you have good lineups and big exposure? You absolutely can. You absolutely can. I still think for my way of playing, but in general, I think that these guys, a lot of them focus more on, I like this guy, I don't like that guy, rather than building good lineups. If Liam showed me his 150 lineups and I thought they were great lineups, I'd be happy to admit it. Still not the way I'm going to play, right? I don't think history has shown, if you look at the people who've won these big prizes in DFS over the last 10 years, there are plenty that did it with heavy exposure, and there are plenty who did it with balanced exposure. So I reject utterly the thought that you can't win with balanced exposure, just like I reject that you can't make good lineups and have big exposure. I think you certainly can. I think, though, that if you are passing on good opportunities, that at times you're not going to make ideal lineups because you had to have your guy, right? One of the things that makes good lineups is taking ADP values. And, especially early, you're not going to get great values if you are reaching. So I am almost never going to reach, except for a stack in a big tournament, right? So there's that. Genuinely curious for an example, if Amari Cooper was going number one overall, even though he's not worth that value, would you still take him at one? Well, first of all, that isn't going to happen, right? But let's look at some guys that it could happen to. All right, so let's take a quick look at my. I did 30 preseason best ball, and let's look at running backs. So let's go to the bottom. I only had 3% Tony. Oh, let's find someone. All right. So Chubb, 3.3%, Swift, 3.3%, Eckler, 3.3%. All right, Eckler, that's a good one. All right. So if Eckler was going number one, would I take him? I think if I'm doing 100, 3% is not a lot of lineups, right? I just personally feel I've been burnt too many times going to zero on guys like that. So I want at least 3 to 5% on all the early round guys. As we get further along, I don't mind zero. I had zero Adam Troutman last year. I just felt that his ADP was ridiculous. So to answer the question, if I felt someone's ADP was completely ridiculous, would I fade them? Absolutely. If I felt that, but most ADP tends to be pretty good, right? ADP tends to be better than that. But as I go on, like his Gabe Davis analogy, would I have 60% on a guy? I've never liked anyone that much, but I don't think it's wrong to do it that late if you really feel that someone's a league winner, right? And I think Gabe Davis was a great play. In hindsight, he had the talent to do what he did. I wouldn't go 60%, but it worked for him, and that's a good thing. All right, let's see if there's anything else I want to cover. I don't want to really belabor this point too much. I do believe in advance rates. I had 30% advance rate last year, and I didn't get any teams to the finals. That's just the way it played out. And I lost some money on underdog. I won back about half my money. So maybe a little more. But I want to, and I, again, when you're risky, you can have that year where you have a 50% win rate. It is possible. But you also have to realize that injuries could make the next year 6% win rate, advance rate. And if you're okay with that, and that's part of your risk tolerance, great. I feel that the risk of injury in best ball is way more than the chance that someone is a must-have guy. And that's my personal belief. And I will kind of leave it like that unless someone else has the questions. So who did I like in early best ball? Well, I liked Donta Foreman. I had 43% early. So I don't mind going early on a guy. But let's go backwards and look. He didn't end up. I thought he was going to end up somewhere good. He didn't. So let's go back to now. I've got 12, and let's look at exposure. It didn't work. Lovely. I think I have, no, I have 0 Foreman through 12. All right. So it balances out over time too. That's the other thing. I want to take advantage. The other reason I don't end up with 60% typically on people is ADP changes over time. I draft throughout the whole season. And when someone's a value, I don't mind getting up to 30, 35% early, knowing that, if I'm right about this guy and that he's and that he's underpriced, he's going to come down. And, a perfect example right now is Rashad Penny, one of my favorite players, right? I have 54% so far. I mean, I just think he's a screaming deal, right? 54%. If you look at my early draft, I think I had about the same. No, not the same. What did I have? I had 30% early. So I've built a lot of Rashad Penny. If I'm right about him, once preseason starts and he is the clear number one guy, he's not going to be in the 8th, 9th, 10th rounds of drafts anymore. The 11th rounds, 12th round sometimes. So then I don't need to draft him in the 6th round because I'm going to have a deep assortment of guys. All right. Any questions, guys? Post them. We're getting ready to wrap this up. I'm wondering if there. I just want to look. I should have probably grabbed a few more of these. So I dealt with scared money. Here's a good question from Austin. I'm most interested out of all players how Cooper and Kamara stand out as top fade at their current prices. I mean, Kamara obviously is his, legal standing, and I don't know why Cooper's so low. But Cooper's not a fade for me. Kamara right now is a bit of a fade. Let's see. There were some good questions in here. Felix said, I will have 0 of a lot of players. I treat this as a DFS slate. Some players are just not in good situations, or I really don't like them. I won't have Amari Cooper. Oh, that's how that came about. It's just not my way of playing. I mean, this Felix guy seemed to have had a pretty good year playing his style. But I want to be consistent. I want to have good teams, and I want to have a shot every year. And I also want to, again, make good lineups. And I don't want to be dogmatic about players. Last year, I didn't like Cooper Kupp coming off of injury, a guy who, counts on his cutting ability. And I had 3%, right? Well, I'm glad I ended up with that 3%, but it should have been at least 5. All right. 4th round, new quarterback. We knew Matthew Stafford, so part of it is humility. And I think some of these guys don't have any because maybe they're young and they haven't seen that they're infallible yet. I don't know. But I know enough to know that I'm going to be wrong. And so blending my teams, blending my exposures gives me the best chance to be successful. All right. So that's that. No other questions. I don't want to drag this out. Again, I want to thank our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. If you've never signed up, go and use the code BESTBALL. I'm sorry, not BESTBALL, Daylight. And you can get a $100 match. It was a good conversation. It got a little chippy at times. It didn't need to, because I do believe that you can make good lineups and have heavy exposure. But the focus shouldn't be heavy exposure versus less exposure. That is a dial that each player has to. Oh, I do want to hit one more thing. I play this way because this is the best way I can play. Again, if you want to take risks and you want to go for it, go for it. Anyway, that's going to do it, folks. Thank you. Thank you to Underdog. Go get them winnings. I'm going to go and do a draft now. So if any of you big shots want to jump in and see what I got, jump in. Thanks.